Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the winding streets of 17th century London, where the cobblestones are slick with soot. The air hangs heavy with the promise of something ancient, and somewhere just out of sight, a small spark is preparing to change the world. You're wrapped in a threadbare cloak. Your boots are a bit too thin for the damp morning chill, and there's an odd tang in the air, wood smoke maybe, but something else too. Something sharper. You pass a street vendor coughing into his elbow. A cat darts past you with its tail puffed up like a chimney brush, and in the distance, bells start ringing in a way that doesn't feel festive. Oh, and by the way, you probably won't survive this, but you know, no pressure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from, and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning fog is denser than usual, almost theatrical, like the city's trying to hide something. You step carefully over a puddle, reflecting the crooked skyline, and realize the sky above isn't just gray, it's laced with streaks of brown and orange. Smoke. Somewhere nearby something's burning. Maybe someone's just roasting chestnuts, you tell yourself. But your gut says otherwise. The streets are mostly quiet, which is rare. You hear a dog bark once, then silence. A few carts trundle past, one loaded with hay, another with live geese honking, as if they know their timing couldn't be worse. The geese always seem to know. As you make your way down Fish Street Hill, your eyes water. That sharp sting confirms it. There's a fire. Not the comforting kind in a hearth or fireplace. No, this is bigger. You're close to the Thames, where the wind picks up, swirling the acrid air around your head. Up ahead, a glow flickers unnaturally across a building's facade. And then you see it tiny at first, like a candle that got cocky. You press forward toward Pudding Lane, stepping around broken barrels and yesterday's waste. Your foot slips briefly on something squishy. Don't look too closely. At the corner, a boy runs past yelling, "The Baker's is on fire." You follow his trail and spot the source, Thomas Farriner's bakery. Or at least what used to be the bakery. Now it's a furnace flame crawling like greedy fingers through the wooden beams. Fire was always a risk in London. After all, most houses are built with timber frames and tightly packed together like drunk cousins at a wedding. Add in thatched roofs, open flames, and a population who thinks fireproofing means hope it rains, and well, you've got a city-sized campfire waiting to happen. A bucket line is formed, sort of. It's mostly men in tunics passing pails of water that evaporate before they even reach the blaze. One particularly frazzled man attempts to slap the fire with what looks like a wet coat. It doesn't help. The flames laugh at his optimism. Fun fact, this was actually a period where many houses still shared walls, and even upper floors, so once one caught fire, its neighbors joined the party. The Great Fire's infamous spread started right here with a sleepy Sunday morning, and one poor decision involving hot coals and a wooden countertop. Or maybe the family cat. Historians still argue whether it was negligence, sabotage, or simply bad luck that sparked it. What they do agree on: the weather had been brutally dry that summer. No rain for weeks. Everything rooftops, shop signs, even your boots feels like it could ignite with one stern look from the sun. You lean on a stone wall and watch as the bakery collapses inward, sending a tower of sparks skyward like some hellish firework. Bits of flaming timber leap from roof to roof. A woman screams from a second-story window, tossing down a bundle wrapped in cloth. It hits the ground with a grunt. Turns out it's a goose. Well, at least it's fire retardant. The heat intensifies. Your eyes squint involuntarily, and your skin prickles as if the flames are reaching for you. This isn't just a fire. This is a monster, and it's hungry. And here's a bit of grim irony. The Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was called to the scene early on. He took one look, shrugged, and famously muttered something along the lines of, "A woman could piss it out." He then rode away. True story. Spoiler alert, no woman ever managed to do so. You step back, drawn into the tide of people now flowing away from Pudding Lane. Shopkeepers carry baskets of goods, children clutch wooden toys, and one man insists on saving his collection of spoons. Priorities. The bells of St. Magnus the Martyr begin tolling louder, now echoing through the alleyways like a warning. You pause on the edge of Thames Street and take one last look back. The sky behind you glows orange and red, like a sunrise drawn by someone with a vendetta. And you're standing right at the beginning of something huge, something that'll reshape an entire city and echo through time. London's about to burn, and you're here for the whole ride. You shuffle away from the blaze, half in awe, half in denial, your feet slipping slightly on the loose stones as panicked footsteps drum around you. The fire behind you crackles louder now, like it's chasing you, or maybe just announcing its intent to dine on all of London. And the buffet starts with Farriner's Bakery, a place that once smelled like bread, and now smells like vengeance. You take one last glance at the scorched doorway. That's where it started, they say, inside the bakehouse of Thomas Farriner, the king's official baker. The story goes that someone didn't quite put out the oven's coals the night before. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe they were drunk. Maybe the family cat kicked something over out of spite. Cats can be dramatic. The bakery's ground floor is already a memory. You swear you see what's left of a rolling pin melt like wax. Upstairs, Farriner's family barely escaped by crawling through a second-story window into the neighbor's house. Except for the maid. She hesitated. She didn't make it. A few folks start whispering that the maid was the first casualty of the Great Fire. A sad and singular death, for now. You follow a small crowd down toward Thames Street, past rows of tightly clustered shops. Barbers, blacksmiths, spice sellers, they all have one thing in common. They're made of wood. Dry wood. The kind that makes a nice whoosh when touched by a single ember. Someone behind you mutters, "This city's a tinderbox." And you don't even bother laughing because they're right. London wasn't built to burn, but it wasn't built not to burn either. The thing is, fire regulations in 1666 were mostly like New Year's resolutions, well-meaning, occasionally attempted, but rarely followed through. No open flames too close to timber beams was a common rule. Try not to store hay in your kitchen was another. But by the time a rule became a law, someone was usually already on fire. You pause to rest your legs beside a narrow alley where laundry still flaps lazily between buildings like oblivious flags of surrender. Overhead, the flames catch onto the wind, leaping in broad arcs from house to house. You watch as a stray spark lands on a rooftop thatch. It smolders for a moment, then erupts. It's almost beautiful in a terrible way, like watching a silk dress fall into a candle. One man nearby clutches a small wooden cross, mumbling prayers. Another swears that he saw the devil himself dancing in the fire. That sounds dramatic, sure, but you'd be surprised what people see when everything they know is being devoured in front of them. Historians still debate whether mass hysteria or genuine sightings shaped some of the stranger accounts from that day. You're starting to think it might be both. As you inch further along the street, the heat pulses in waves. It's oddly intimate, like the fire knows you, like it's breathing with you, or worse, against you. Now here's something not everyone tells you back in those days. Buildings didn't just share walls. They often shared lofts, floors, even chimneys. So if one house caught fire, its neighbors might as well send out invitations. Add to that the fact that most chimneys were clogged with soot, and you have vertical shafts of doom sucking flames from one household to the next. You pass a tavern. The Sooty Hound, where the signboard is already blackened, and a terrified man tosses out barrels of ale to make room for salvaged furniture. One bursts, and frothy liquid sloshes across the cobblestones. A woman yells after him, "Not the good batch. Priorities again." A teenage boy, face streaked with ash, pushes past you carrying a canary in a cage. He looks back once his eyes wide, not with fear exactly, but with the understanding that his world is changing in real time. You nod at him. He doesn't nod back. Fair enough. You make it to the edge of Thames Street, where the view opens briefly. The river glints in the smoky light, and for a second, you think maybe the water will stop the fire. Maybe the Thames will act like a barrier. But then you see something floating. Not driftwood, not a boat, a mattress, and it's on fire. Apparently someone tried to toss their bedding into the river to save it. Problem is, the mattress was already smoldering, so now you're watching an ignited raft of straw bob toward Southwark like a flaming message in a bottle. Help. Everything is terrible. You lean against a stone post and feel it warm beneath your palm. That's the part that gets you. The heat isn't just in the air. It's in everything. The ground, the walls, your clothes, even your breath. Like London is slowly turning into a kiln. You consider turning back, but then you hear a scream. No, it's a laugh. Someone's laughing. You squint through the haze and see a woman dancing in circles, her skirts flaring, cheeks flushed. She's shouting, "Let it burn, let it all burn." A small crowd watches her from a cautious distance, unsure whether she's prophetic or just very, very tired. Maybe both. London has always walked that line. The fire is spreading faster now, catching not just buildings but wagons, fences, even loose hay swept into corners. You pass a butcher's cart where sausages sizzle in their casing unattended. The irony is not lost on you. And as smoke curls under your collar and your boots scuff through layers of ash and debris, one thought keeps returning. This isn't just a fire, it's a reckoning. Something old and bloated is being burned away. What rises in its place? Well, we're not there yet. But you are, step by step, breath by smoky breath. London's burning and you've still got a front row seat. You press forward, or rather sideways, because the normal paths have turned into swirls of fire panic and very poor decision-making. The deeper you go into London's heart, the more the city starts to resemble a giant wooden puzzle box, and you begin to notice just how spectacularly flammable it all is. It's not just the buildings, it's everything. You feel like you're walking through a live-action demonstration of how not to build a city. Take the houses, for example, tall timber-framed, often with upper stories that lean out over the street like gossipy neighbors trying to eavesdrop on each other. You look up, and they seem to be touching, conspiring, or maybe just waiting for the moment they can collapse together in dramatic solidarity. The streets themselves are barely wide enough for two people to pass without awkward eye contact. Perfect for trapping heat, ideal for spreading fire. Absolutely terrible for evacuating unless you're trying to leave behind all your dignity and half your belongings. You pause beside a small stall once used by a candle maker. It's already scorched and blackened, ironic given the profession. There's a melted candle on the ground, still faintly glowing, like it doesn't realize it's not helping anymore. People bustle around you in varying states of denial. One man insists the fire will surely die out soon, while simultaneously tossing buckets of water at a wall of flames tall enough to demand voting rights. Another insists this is a punishment from God. Someone else argues it's the work of foreign saboteurs. Historians still debate the sheer volume of conspiracy theories that ignited alongside the actual fire. French spies, Dutch agents, even papist arsonists, they all got some blame. Because obviously it couldn't have been years of dry weather, bad urban planning, and one inattentive baker. You duck beneath a hanging sign that reads, "Miss Porter's Linen and Leaks," a business model you decide not to question, and realize just how much dried fabric is stuffed into the windows and door frames of most shops. It's like the buildings themselves are daring the fire to try them. And try them it does. There's a sudden whoosh, and a nearby home bursts from its windows like it sneezed fire. Flames crawl up the exterior in jagged lines, and for a moment you swear you hear laughter. It could be your imagination. It could be the timber groaning. It could be the sound of London cracking its knuckles. You slip through a side alley to avoid a collapsing awning, only to find yourself in a cluster of homes so tightly packed it feels like a treehouse village, designed by someone who hated air circulation. You touch a wall hot. You touch another hotter. You stop touching things. You find a small open square, well more like a lopsided triangle where several townsfolk are gathered in what looks like an emergency town meeting, but with more shouting and less planning. A woman yells, "We need to tear down the buildings. Make a fire break." A man shouts back, "This is my home, not kindling." Then they argue about whose ox cart blocked whose chimney in 1662, because in times of disaster nothing matters more than old grudges. Truth is, they're both kind of right. Fire breaks could work clearing buildings to create empty gaps that flames can't leap across. But that only helps if people start soon and agree on what to tear down. Spoiler, they don't. You sit briefly on a toppled crate, letting the ash settle on your shoulders like confused snow. In the background, someone plays a lute terribly, and you suspect it's less for comfort and more for dramatic effect. You look around and realize everything here is stacked, stuffed, wedged, or squeezed. Barrels beside firewood, beside straw, beside oil lamps. The entire city is one long, doomed game of fired Jenga. And it's not just the homes. Warehouses are packed with tallow pitch coal, basically a pyromaniac's shopping list. You pass a shed with crates labeled "Turpentine, do not shake." Bold of them to assume turpentine respects labels. You start to see the pattern why the fire is spreading so fast. It's not just about wood and wind. It's about how London was built to contain life by compressing it. Tightly packed people, tightly packed structures, tightly packed lives. So when something ignites, there's no room for escape. Only acceleration. There's a faint drizzle now, but it's nothing helpful. Just the kind that makes you damp and annoyed while doing absolutely nothing to quench a firestorm. You tip your face up anyway, desperate for relief. One drop lands squarely on your eyelid. Classic. A baker's apprentice passes you red-faced, carrying what looks like a sack of flour and an extremely alarmed parrot. Behind him, another man wheels a barrow piled high with books, all of them smoke-stained and haphazardly stacked like knowledge on the run. You catch the title, "Divine Judgment and Practical Cookery." Couldn't be more on theme. You glance up and see the sun again, barely visible through the haze, a weak orange disk like a dying ember. Around you, the heat continues to rise. The fire's not slowing down. It's just choosing its next targets. The city groans, creaks, and in some cases explodes. You swear you hear something big give way, maybe a beam, maybe a rooftop, maybe the idea that this will all be over soon. Either way, you're not sure London can take much more of this. And neither can you. But there's still something compelling about this destruction. Something that grips your ribs and tugs you deeper. The fire isn't just consuming the city, it's peeling it open, revealing what's under the paint, the polish, the pretense. And if you listen closely under the roar of the flames and the thump of collapsing wood, You can almost hear London exhale. You move on, or rather you're gently herded by heat smoke and the steadily growing crowd of increasingly singed Londoners into a wider street where chaos has begun wearing a very stylish new hat mismanagement. This is where the response to the fire goes from mildly disorganized to buckets and beer. The city's citizens are trying. Really, they are. A few bucket lines stretch bravely down to the Thames, filled with people heaving water up from the river with the combined optimism of a children's lemonade stand. The problem? The buckets are wooden. The fire doesn't care, and by the time the water reaches the flames, it's either spilled steaming or swallowed by a much larger appetite. You pass one group frantically ladling water from an ale barrel, which is, let's be honest, a little bit tragic. It doesn't work, but everyone looks mildly hydrated. A man yells, "Use the beer," and another screams back, "Are you mad? That's the good stuff." Priorities are reevaluated. So are friendships. Some brave, or possibly just bored souls, have taken to beating flames with wet cloths using door panels as shields, or hurling handfuls of dirt into windows that no longer exist. Someone tries to shoot the fire with a musket. You keep walking. There's yelling from the rooftops. Get out, and for once you think it might not be a metaphor. Chimneys belch black smoke like giant exhausted noses. You pass a building that appears to be melting its facade, slumping inward like it's giving up on being a structure and embracing its new life as goo. A man dressed in heavy robes stumbles past, pulling along a goat by a rope leash. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Priestly reasons, he mutters, and you decide not to ask. And then, of course, comes the finger-pointing. Blame in 1666 is as abundant as firewood. You overhear snippets, it was the Papists. No, it's the French, I heard it was the Dutch. My neighbor never liked baked goods. People are scared, which means people want answers, and if those answers come pre-packaged with suspicion and a foreign accent, all the better. Historians still argue whether any real evidence existed for foreign arsonists, or whether the paranoia was just London's coping mechanism in wig form. You round a corner and stumble upon a small square where several angry citizens have surrounded a man shouting in heavily accented English. He's waving his hands trying to explain he's Swiss, not French, and that he came here for work, not pyromania. The crowd's not convinced. A constable steps in just in time to prevent an ugly escalation. You move on cheeks hot, unsure if it's the fire or secondhand shame. You find a perch on the edge of a broken fountain once decorative, now just soggy, and take a moment to observe the patterns. Fires leap in bursts like punctuation. The city responds with semicolons of panic. There's a rhythm awful but unmistakable. To your left, two men argue about whether to tear down a nearby shop to create a fire break. One says it's the only way. The other says it's his livelihood. Their solution: try to do both at once and fail at both spectacularly. Someone throws a brick through a window, not out of anger but to rescue a trapped dog. The dog bolts out and immediately relieves itself on someone's boot. Cheers erupt anyway. A moment of levity in a sea of soot. You watch a group of laborers attempt a controlled demolition. The goal: remove buildings ahead of the flames to stop their advance. The method: explosives. The result: a slightly larger fire. Who could have seen that coming? But not everyone is ineffective. Some local parishes manage to organize with surprising speed. Clerics hand out water and bread, others help elderly residents evacuate, and one group even manages to save most of their church's silver. Because you know spiritual wealth and actual wealth. The Lord Mayor. You hear he's been seen again this time, muttering something about being completely out of his depth before galloping off like a man with an alibi to fabricate. Classic leadership. Amid the scrambling and shouting, you spot a familiar figure, A man in a worn leather coat scribbling furiously in a small notebook while half listening to nearby conversations. Samuel Pepys, the man, the myth, the nosy diarist. You sidle closer, pretending to tie a bootlace and eavesdrop. Pepys mutters to himself. Strange. I did bury my Parmesan cheese this morning to protect it. You look up. Excuse me. Yes, it's true. In the face of one of London's worst disasters, Pepys famously buried his cheese in the garden for safekeeping. Historians love him for it. Some call it eccentric, others heroic. You just wonder what else is under his rhubarb. Someone rushes up to him, breathless. Mr. Pepys. The Navy office. It may be next. Pepys nods grimly, pockets his quill, and scampers off like a man who's got at least 3 journals and 1 secret wine stash to protect. You lean back against the cold stone eyes flicking up to the sky. The smoke is thicker now. The sun is just a vague smear. People still shout. Buildings still burn. But somewhere under it all, there's a strange sense of rhythm. Like the city is moving through stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, beer throwing. And you're the quiet observer. The soot-covered witness. The one slowly understanding that this fire isn't just a disaster, it's a mirror. Of fear, of pride, of architecture that could really use a do-over. And as another building groans and slumps into the street, you find yourself whispering almost involuntarily. We're going to need a lot more buckets. The deeper you go into the smoldering belly of the city, the stranger it all becomes. You turn down a narrow passage, more of a crack in the wall, really, and find yourself face to feather with a cloud of pigeons launching skyward in a fluttery panic. Smoke curls after them like it's curious. They flap in wild spirals, their wings dusted gray with soot. You wonder if they'll ever find their roosts again. Probably not. But pigeons are like Londoners, adaptable, dusty, and only mildly suspicious of everything. The bells toll again. Not a peal for celebration, or even warning now, just background music to chaos. You move toward the sound, ducking under a crooked archway where someone's written, "Save us, Lord," in charcoal. Whether it's a prayer or a protest, you're not sure. Probably both. You round a corner and nearly trip over a pile of books scattered in the middle of the street history law, even something called A Gentleman's Guide to Urban Chickens. Why not you pick one up and blow off the ash? Useless now. Fire doesn't care about literacy. And then you spot him, a man with a prominent wig and even more prominent eyebrows, standing in the middle of the road, as if the flames have personally offended him. Samuel Pepys, again, of course, scribbling furiously into his notebook, muttering observations like, saw a dog flee with half a duck, and smells of cinnamon and destruction. You don't want to interrupt genius, so you nod and shuffle past. Pepys wasn't just documenting London's downfall for fun. He was the chief secretary to the Admiralty. He had responsibilities. Also, he had a terrifyingly detailed diary habit. That man wrote everything down. Historians later gawked at his fire entries, not because of the grand prose, but because he included things like how many boats he counted on the Thames, how much cheese he buried, yes, the Parmesan again, and what his wife said when he told her they might need to flee. Spoiler, she wasn't thrilled. You follow a small crowd past All Hallows by the Tower Church. Someone swears they saw flames crawling across the lead roof like spiders. Another says they saw a ghost in the smoke. That might have been a laundry line. The air is thicker now, not just smoky, but chunky. You cough, taste the grit, and realize it's not just wood dust, it's personal possessions, family homes and generations of memories reduced to ash in the wind. And still people stop to grab what they can, a doll, a frying pan, a jar of pickled something that probably wasn't good before the fire. Just ahead, a man in a waistcoat is shouting about a pig. Apparently it was his. Apparently someone else took it. The current owner insists they rescued it. Now they're arguing over pork custody in the middle of the apocalypse. A little further down the road, the crowd suddenly veers right toward the river. You follow, drawn by the promise of space air, maybe even a breeze that doesn't come with smoke and existential dread. The Thames is alive. Not with water, really, but with escape. Boats of every shape and level of seaworthiness bob and jostle at the docks. Families scramble aboard some dragging wagons, others clutching bundles that scream last-minute decisions. You see one man trying to load an entire armoire onto a tiny fishing skiff. The boat groans in protest. So do the passengers. There's a surreal beauty to it all. The water reflects the fire like a mirror having a bad dream. The sky is orange. The river is orange. The buildings are increasingly not buildings anymore. You linger by the docks, watching a woman cradle her cat like royalty as she's rowed away by a man who clearly regrets volunteering. Next to them, a barrel labeled "Do Not Open" bobs lazily in the tide. You don't open it. And here's your mainstream historical fact for the night: the Thames, despite its general filth and mysterious floating barrels, was the lifeline during the fire. Many Londoners escaped by boat, some rowing across, others simply drifting away from the heat. It's estimated thousands survived this way, and yet the river also carried ash and debris for days, like a somber message in code. A small boy near you tosses a pebble into the water, then turns to ask if God is angry. No one answers. Mostly because no one really knows. That's one of those moments historians can't agree on. Was the fire seen as punishment, as redemption? A cosmic reset button? Depends who you ask. Depends what they lost. You turn back toward the street. The fire is louder now. Not just a sound, but a presence. It howls. It breathes. You begin to understand why some folks described it like a beast, with teeth, with appetite, with opinion. A man runs past you, clutching a goose under one arm and what appears to be a violin under the other. A woman trails behind, yelling, "We needed the goose more than the violin, you think?" Why not both? Back in the alleys, people light their own fires, controlled ones, to burn furniture ahead of the real flames, hoping to make fire breaks. It's like setting traps for a dragon with matches and hope. You pass one such pyre, where a group sings a hymn in ragged harmony, smoke wreathing around them like a reluctant choir. You sit briefly on the edge of a stairwell, letting the heat settle into your bones. It's a warmth that no longer feels like comfort, more like a warning, more like a countdown. And as the night edges closer, you realize this is only day one. The fire isn't done. It's barely begun. You decide to follow the current of humanity flowing along the riverbank, drawn not just by instinct, but by the soft rhythmic splash of oars slicing through the water. It's oddly soothing until you hear a loud crack behind you, the unmistakable sound of a roof giving up on structural integrity. You don't look back. You already know what it looks like: bright, collapsing final. At the water's edge, the scene has taken on the quality of a chaotic picnic. Families huddle on blankets, some sobbing, some just chewing stale bread in stunned silence. There's a sense that everyone's waiting for someone to show up and declare, "It's all a big mistake. You can go home now." But no one does. You watch an elderly couple pass a bottle of wine back and forth. They're not running. They're not even panicking. They just sit and sip, watching the city burn like it's an overdue performance. The man nods at you. "London always did like to put on a show," he says, and takes another swig. A dog barks, a baby, cries, a chicken hops onto a barge, and is promptly adopted by a new family. Survival is apparently not just for the fittest, but also for the most opportunistic poultry. You ease onto a wooden bench, only slightly charred, and gaze out over the Thames. The air here is marginally cleaner, though it still tastes like peppery regret. You spot boats drifting slowly past, overloaded with boxes, cloaks, the occasional harp. One particularly fancy skiff glides by with velvet curtains blowing dramatically in the wind. Inside, a woman fans herself with what appears to be a tax ledger. Priorities. You turn and see a group trying to fit a horse onto a boat meant for 6 people. The horse disagrees. Loudly. It becomes a debate. It becomes a minor spectacle. In the end, the horse wins as horses usually do, and the boat sets off with only 3 humans and 1 very smug-looking animal. It's in this odd lull that you begin to notice a pattern. The city isn't just burning from the ground up, it's beginning to burn emotionally too. People are not only evacuating their homes, they're evacuating their identities. The shopkeeper is no longer that man with the velvet hat and the pungent cheese, but just a guy holding a crying baby. The tailor is now a refugee in someone else's boat. Everyone's status has been equalized by fire. You begin to walk again, the river on one side, smoke on the other. Somewhere behind the curtain of haze, you can hear the cries of church bells being swallowed up one by one. You recognize the sound of St. Lawrence Jury's bells. At least you think it is cutting off mid-ring, like a sentence unfinished. A woman passes you with soot streaks on her cheeks and a bucket of lemons in each hand. You have questions, but none that really matter. You nod instead. She nods back like you're both in on the same cosmic joke. Just ahead, the Tower of London looms, its massive stone body miraculously untouched for now. You move closer, drawn by both its ominous presence and the murmured rumors floating among the crowd. They say the guards have been told to stand fast, that King Charles himself has ordered the tower to be protected at all costs. Not because of the royal residence, he's not even staying there, but because of what's inside powder stores, ancient records, and apparently some very irreplaceable hats. The tower contains things no fire should touch. You slip past a distracted guard whose main priority seems to be stopping people from tying up goats to the outer gate. Once inside the yard, the air cools slightly, protected by thick stone walls. It feels separate, almost safe. Which is probably why the royal scribes are scrambling around like manic hens, gathering scrolls and sealed boxes into carts. One of them nearly drops a stack of parchment curses in Latin and mutters something about losing the crown's best insult laws. You help him pick up a loose page. It's a tax record from 1582, probably not worth dying for. But still, there's a murmur about the crown jewels, whether they've already been moved or if they're locked somewhere deep inside. No one gives you a straight answer. Historians still debate whether the jewels were actually in danger or if their removal was more PR stunt than necessity. Either way, it adds to the drama. You wander deeper into the fortress grounds, where a line of carts has begun forming. They're loading up official documents, preserved ledgers, and even a portrait or two. One guard is arguing over whether a bust of a former king qualifies as essential. The bust looks unimpressed. Out in the courtyard, pigeons return, circling overhead, like they're trying to re-establish dominance. You swear one of them is missing a few tail feathers. Survivors, all of them. Dirty, determined, winged little metaphors. You slip out the back gate before someone asks for your assistance in lifting a suspiciously heavy crate, labeled miscellaneous but important. Outside, the heat hits again like a slap. You're back in the fire's breath, and the illusion of safety evaporates with the next gust of wind. As you wind your way past a group of fishmongers arguing about who gets to keep the last wheelbarrow, you hear someone mutter. At least the rats are fleeing too. You glance down. He's right. There they go, tiny shadows scampering between your boots, abandoning the city they'd long claimed as theirs. You're not sure whether to be relieved or insulted. And still above it all, the smoke thickens. You cough-taste brick and bitterness. You shield your eyes and keep moving. London's burning. The tower may stand, but nothing else feels solid. Not time, not truth, not even the road beneath your feet. But you keep walking, Because you have to see what burns next. You veer off the main road again, instinct guiding you more than logic at this point. The city's map has folded in on itself. Landmarks, erased paths, rerouted neighborhoods turned into ash-blown memories. You used to know where everything was. Now you're just navigating by feel and faint hope that the ground beneath you is still there. You pass a burned-out fish stall. The scent lingers halfway between seafood and sorrow. A nearby barrel is still smoking, though, from what you're not entirely sure. Someone has scrawled, "Don't touch into the soot" on its side. You absolutely don't touch it. Then you see it rising out of the murky air like a brooding stone guardian, the Tower of London again. You hadn't meant to loop back, but here you are. And this time you're drawn toward something less obvious, the underground. Most people don't think about the tower's vaults, its armories, its endless maze of tunnels and chambers carved into the earth like a paranoid mole's dream. But you've always been curious. And right now, curiosity isn't just dangerous, it's inevitable. You follow a guard down into the cool belly of the structure, ducking beneath low arches and squeezing through torchlit corridors that smell of old metal and fresher fear. He doesn't ask who you are. Maybe he thinks you belong here. Maybe no one's checking credentials anymore. You emerge into a vault room lined with iron doors and dusty shelves stacked with ledgers, maps, scrolls, documents that would bore most people to sleep, but would make historians foam at the mouth. A clerk with an ink-stained collar is barking orders to two younger scribes, tossing bound volumes into crates like he's sorting potatoes. You catch the titles Royal Edicts 1611, 1615, London Water Rights Inventories of Foreign Embassies. Important stuff, sure, but you notice they're skipping anything labeled domestic expenses. Smart move. Let the fire handle the budget cuts. In the corner, two men argue about a chest with iron reinforcements. One swears it holds priceless letters from Queen Elizabeth I. The other swears it's just spare boot buckles. They open it. It's boot buckles. A lot of boot buckles. There's something eerie about being in a vault while the world above burns. You expect calm. What you get is urgency, quiet, determined, almost surgical. The clerks aren't panicking. They're prioritizing. Triage for paper and parchment. One chamber is locked. No one's quite sure what's inside, but no one seems brave enough to try the key. Someone jokes it's haunted. Someone else says it's the king's awkward poetry. You'll never know. The door stays shut. As you move through the corridor, you notice a vault door partially open. Inside, the walls are lined with weapons, halberds, swords, muskets, even a few early pistols. All polished, all neatly stored, all completely useless right now. You imagine trying to fight a citywide inferno with a pike. Somehow, it feels like the worst jousting tournament ever. Still, it's a sobering sight, this collection of things made for defending a kingdom, all sitting quietly while fire tears through the capital. London isn't under siege by men. It's being devoured by its own design. Then there's the jewel rumor. You overhear two guards whispering about it. Some say the crown jewels were moved at dawn, smuggled upriver in an unmarked crate. Others claim they're still locked in a subterranean chamber with a guard posted day and night. The truth, historians still argue. Some records say yes, others are mysteriously blank. And when it comes to treasures, London has always had a knack for rewriting the narrative. You take one last turn through the vault corridors, letting your fingers brush ancient bricks. Some of these stones have stood for centuries through plagues and plots and the occasional royal tantrum. They'll likely survive this too. But above you, the city sounds different. Less crackling, more roaring. You realize the fire has reached a crescendo. You're underground during the overture of destruction. You climb back up boots echoing against damp stairs. As you push through the exit, a blast of heat slaps you like a disappointed chef. The tower's main courtyard is fuller now. Guards, scribes, even cooks, everyone's prepping for the possibility that even this fortress might not hold. And yet there's a strange calm. Maybe it's the thickness of the stone. Maybe it's the sense that if the tower falls, there's nothing left to save. Or maybe it's just fatigue. A collective exhale before the next inhalation of panic. You exit through a rear gate where fewer people are gathered. A young girl hands you a water skin without a word. You nod your thanks. She's barefoot. Her dress is singed at the hem. She turns and disappears into the crowd like smoke itself. As you step back into the streets, the fire's glow is now all-encompassing. The horizon isn't a line anymore. It's a wall of flickering dread. You pause and take a breath. Somewhere deep in the vaults, history was saved. But up here, it's still being written in smoke and cinders. You're back out in the street and it hits you all at once. The heat, the howling, the unmistakable crunch of timber folding in on itself like it's surrendering to the inevitable. The tower may be made of stone, but London is a bonfire with delusions of grandeur. You turn into what used to be a merchant's quarter. It's nearly unrecognizable now, signs hanging by a single nail, windows smashed cobblestones coated in a soft ash blanket that puffs up with each step. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks frantically and is immediately shushed by a woman holding a teacup. And nothing else. No saucer, no clothes, just the cup. She looks dazed. You decide not to ask. It's here in this maze of flame-licked alleyways and collapsing storefronts that you hear the first clear, commanding voice of the day. Clear the block. Tear it down now, for God's sake. You follow the sound weaving through carts of salvaged silverware and three guys trying to rescue a grandfather clock that clearly does not want to be rescued. At the center of the commotion stands King Charles II. You didn't expect to see him in the middle of this mess. But there he is, tall wig, askew eyes, sharp. And maybe it's the heat or the shock, but you're not entirely sure if the man looks heroic or mildly hungover. He's flanked by a team of surveyors, masons, and what looks like 3 different barbers who've mistaken this for a parade. They're arguing about fire breaks, essentially creating gaps in the urban fabric, so the fire can't keep skipping merrily from house to house. It's a desperate plan. But desperation, it seems, has been promoted to project manager. Charles turns to a man in a black waistcoat, Sir William Penn, you think, and mutters, "We should have done this hours ago." No one disagrees. You watch as soldiers begin smashing through nearby homes with axes, shouting for civilians to clear out. Some protest, others help. One man refuses to leave until he finds his lucky spoon. His roof collapses while he's still searching. You never find out if he made it. This firebreak operation isn't clean. It's not orderly. It's more like a food fight where the food is architecture. But it's something. It's action. For the first time all day, people aren't just reacting, they're choosing the destruction, hoping it'll buy them salvation. Historians still argue whether these last-minute demolitions helped slow the fire. Some say yes, pointing to streets where the flames seemed to pause, confused by the sudden emptiness. Others argue it was too little too late, that the real turning point came when the wind finally shifted. Either way, you can't help but be fascinated. You're standing in a place where London is quite literally tearing itself apart to save what's left. You pass a tailor's shop just as it's being torn down. Fabrics fly into the street, velvet, linen, wool, all catching the sun like fluttering flames of a more fashionable kind. A boy tries to catch one mid-air, giggles, and runs off with a crimson bolt trailing behind him like a royal cape. You smile despite yourself. Kids always find the weirdest way to win. You duck as part of a roof falls, and suddenly you're in a cloud of ash so thick it muffles sound. Your ears ring. Everything slows. You stagger forward, barely able to see until the haze thins, and a man with a jug of water appears beside you like a ghost with hydration. "Drink," he says. You do. It tastes like smoke and something slightly floral. Possibly rose petals. Possibly mold. Once you can see again, you notice a row of fire hooks, long poles with barbed ends being passed down a line of sweating volunteers. These were once used for pulling down weak structures, but now they've become the last line of defense. It's medieval tech in an apocalyptic moment, and it somehow works. Someone next to you remarks, they say this is divine punishment. But if it is, why's the royal wardrobe still untouched? You don't answer. You're too busy watching another house crash like a flan in a cupboard. And then you see it a woman with singed hair and a toddler on her hip, pointing directly at the king. "You going to save us or just watch?" she yells. To his credit, Charles doesn't flinch. He walks over, kneels beside the child, and hands him a small medallion from around his neck. "For luck," he says. The toddler promptly drops it. The king laughs. So does the mother. It's the first moment of absurd humanity you've seen in hours. Charles returns to his men, shouting something about finding more volunteers. You briefly consider stepping forward. But then you notice the house across the street has started leaking fire from its second floor, and the leaking is moving in your direction. You run. You run past a blacksmith pouring water onto his own anvil because it's too hot to touch. You run past a priest tossing hymnals out a window and a butcher hurling sausages into the street because apparently they were the cause of his chimney problem. You run until your legs scream and your lungs taste like someone set fire to pepper and gave it a grudge. Eventually you slow, not because the danger has passed, but because you've hit a wall physically and emotionally. You lean against a crumbling garden gate and listen to the dull thud of pickaxes in the distance, the rising chant of men working together, and the occasional squawk of a parrot shouting "hot, hot" from someone's shoulder. And as you catch your breath, you realize something London might be burning, but it's also fighting. Not with precision, not always with dignity, but with a kind of desperate, ash-covered tenacity that's weirdly inspiring. You wipe your forehead, which immediately becomes dirty again, and whisper to no one in particular, "Maybe we'll make it." You press on the fire, now feeling less like an event and more like a personality, rude, uninvited with a flair for the dramatic. The city around you has gone from recognizable to something else entirely, a charcoal sketch smudged by wind and panic. You squint through the haze and find yourself drawn into a narrow lane you'd swear used to be bustling with life. Now it's just hollow. It's quiet here. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in your ears and makes your heartbeat feel like it's shouting. The buildings are mostly gone, or worse, half standing like skeletal stage props for a tragedy that forgot its script. You tiptoe past a crooked doorway. Inside you spot a table still set for dinner, a plate of burned pears, and a spoon gently melting into a wooden floor that no longer feels solid. These places, these hidden cellars and fractured homes, they aren't just structures. They're memory vaults, rooms, where hundreds of lives unfolded in routines now reduced to ash. You enter one, ducking beneath a half-fallen beam. The space is surprisingly intact, the kind of cellar that once held wine and cheese and, judging by the odor, maybe someone's pickled eel collection. You sit on a stone ledge and breathe in the scent of history, not the polished museum-friendly kind, but the real grimy one. Damp stone, burned leather, dusty fear. Suddenly a noise behind you, soft scratching. You freeze, probably a rat, or given recent luck something slightly weirder. You turn slowly only to find a cat. One eye-tail singed, seated like royalty on an overturned bucket. You stare at each other. It yawns, then vanishes into a hole in the wall like a ghost clocking out of work. The quiet starts to feel thick here, oppressive. And you realize something: the fire isn't the only thing haunting these ruins. It's the stories echoing in every corner. You feel like you've stepped into the part of London that the daylight doesn't know about. You climb back out into the street, legs shaky, and notice a church tower nearby St. Bride's, maybe. Or what's left of it. The steeple is cracked down the middle, and yet the bell still hangs untouched, like it's waiting for someone to ring it one last time. You almost do. But something about the silence stops you. Some spaces are sacred even when ruined. People pass by now, and then their faces hollowed by smoke and sleeplessness. They don't look at you. They're too busy carrying chairs, children loaves of bread with just enough charring to be ironic. One man is dragging a crate labeled mostly potatoes. You don't ask. Further ahead, you find what looks like an open doorway with no building attached. Just the frame stubbornly standing like a confused gatekeeper. You walk through it because of course you do. Nothing happens. But somehow it still feels like a threshold, a portal from before to after. And in the middle of this strange wasteland, you notice a peculiar thing, embers. Not fires, not flames, but little flickering embers in odd corners like the city isn't done breathing yet. They glow inside windowsills, under collapsed stairs, even in an old boot. Each one a whisper of heat, a faint promise that London hasn't quite finished screaming. You pause near one and stare into it. There's something hypnotic about it. You wonder what this ember was, once part of a hearth, a lantern, a love letter that got tossed into the fire before it was read. Then the breeze picks up and carries ash into your hair, your mouth, your eyes. You spit and cough and blink away the dust just in time to see a figure limping across the street. An older man in clerical robes. He's carrying a sack and muttering to himself, "Still more scrolls, still more sins." You watch him disappear down a side alley and decide not to follow. Some ghosts don't want company. You stumble upon a broken staircase that descends into what used to be a tavern basement. You go down a few steps, steadying yourself on the cracked wall. The temperature drops here. No fire yet. Just the cold residue of loss. On a shelf, you see a dusty bottle still miraculously upright. The label reads, "Burnt wood spirits strong enough to forget." You laugh, softly, then louder. The sound bounces oddly in the space like laughter isn't used to being here. And here's a historical truth tucked among the dust: many cellars did survive the fire. Not all, but enough to preserve wine supplies, even personal treasures that would later resurface like ghosts with good timing. Some families returned weeks later to dig through what was left, hoping for silver heirlooms. Or just closure. You leave the tavern ghost behind and wander back into the soot-blown air. You're beginning to feel it now, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the taste of smoke, a sense of scale. This isn't just one fire. It's a network of losses spreading out in every direction. Not just physical destruction, but emotional hollows, left behind one charred window at a time. As you move past a half-collapsed wall, you notice someone scrawled a message in coal rebuild. But remember, below it, a handprint small, childlike. You place your own hand next to it. The fit is almost perfect. You walk on, and behind you the ember in the boot flares briefly, then fades. You walk without really knowing where you're headed now, letting your feet follow the seams of cracked stone and soot. London isn't a city anymore. It's a riddle on fire. Every turn presents a question, and most of the answers are ash. As you round a bend near what used to be a bookseller's row, now a grim sculpture garden of charred shelves and collapsed walls, you overhear the beginnings of a heated debate. Not about fire routes or rescue plans, or whether someone should really be carrying a harpsichord down a ladder right now they shouldn't. No, this is about who did it. Because, of course, someone must have done this. Accidents are uncomfortable. Intentions are much easier to fight about. You linger near the edge of a crowd gathered at a scorched square, watching people hiss and point fingers. It was the French, someone yells, voice ragged. No, the Dutch. They've always hated us, shouts another. I heard it was Catholics setting revenge for persecution, one man growls. And from the edge a voice mumbles, could be dragons, you know. You don't know whether to laugh or back away slowly. It's always like this when the unthinkable happens. The mind demands culprits. Logic gets very cozy with paranoia. And in 1666, London xenophobia had been patiently waiting in the wings, like an understudy praying for disaster. Now it's getting a standing ovation. You recognize one of the more animated shouters. He's a printer from earlier hands, still stained with ink. He's waving a crumpled paper that claims papists confessed to setting fire. You glance over and spot the headline. It's misspelled. Twice. This isn't news, it's fear marketing. And the thing is, the government doesn't help. Broadsheets are flying faster than buckets, each one more speculative than the last. Some say it was a foreign agent slipping into the bakery at dawn. Others say there were 2 fires started simultaneously, one near the bakery, one near the docks. Never mind that no one actually saw both. Details are like timber here burned through quickly. Historians still argue about the cause. Sure, Thomas Farriner's bakery is the most likely source. But theories range from lightning no storm, but okay to divine wrath, always popular to military sabotage. No conclusive proof, just a lot of finger-pointing and dramatic swearing. The king eventually pins blame on the hand of God, a great wind and dry weather. But that's not spicy enough for the public. They want villains with accents, preferably ones that already owe rent. You drift away from the crowd and find yourself in a quieter street, if quieter means fewer torches and more smoldering piles. Here the gossip comes in whispers instead of shouts. A woman nearby murmurs. They say a Frenchman confessed, under duress, mind you. Another adds, he didn't speak English, so maybe he didn't actually confess. A third says, maybe he just asked where the fish market went. Truth is, a man did get arrested. Robert Hubert, French, confessed to setting the fire. Later investigations revealed he wasn't even in London when it started. Oops, he was still executed. Because sometimes history is less about truth and more about closure, no matter how fake. You glance up and spot a weather vane spinning wildly. No wind, no reason. It's like even metal is nervous. You sit for a moment on a barrel that might once have held pickles, and you think how fragile peace is. One fire, and suddenly your neighbors are suspects, and every unfamiliar face is a potential arsonist. Across the street, someone's painted a crude symbol on a door, a jagged cross with 3 circles beneath. You don't know what it means. Probably nothing. Probably everything. In a nearby doorway, an older woman sits holding a cloth over her face. It wasn't just the fire, she mutters. It was the hate that spread faster. You nod, though you don't think she's speaking to you. You begin walking again past what was once a pastry shop, where a half-burned sign reads, Buns of Grace. A pigeon lands on the awning pecks, once then leaves. Even the birds are done with this nonsense. You catch a glimpse of a burned notice board. Torn bits of posters flap limply. One reads, Fire insurance available. You blink. That probably didn't age well. And yet, amid the paranoia and the finger-pointing, you notice a countercurrent, people handing each other water, helping to lift rubble-sharing food that isn't entirely charcoal. It's like the fear wants to split the city in half, but something older and softer keeps knitting it back together. Londoners, for all their suspicion, have a way of showing up for each other when things get really bad. You pause at a well where a boy with soot on his nose offers you a cup of water without a word. You take it, sip, nod. He nods back. That's enough. You keep walking. Behind you, the shouting continues, blame flung like stones in a glass city. Ahead, The fire still breathes. But so does something else. Something tired, hopeful, cracked, but not collapsed. And as you step over a burned broom, you realize the true mystery isn't who started the fire. It's how anyone still finds the strength to keep going. You push on toward what remains of the old city center, guided now by something more than curiosity. Maybe it's the absence of noise in this particular stretch. No shouts, no collapsing roofs, just the eerie sound of wind whistling through scorched windows and the faint rhythmic tap of your boots echoing over dust and half-melted cobblestone. And then something strange happens. The air shifts. It's still hot, don't get your hopes up, but there's a change in texture. A stillness. You sniff cautiously. No smoke, not much anyway. Just the earthy scent of wet clay and wood that's already burned itself out. You look around confused. The fire seems to have paused here, which is odd, suspicious even, like it's taking a breath. A man passes you covered in soot from head to toe, humming a tune that sounds vaguely like a hymn, but with new lyrics about blistered boots. Behind him, a small cluster of women kneel beside a well refilling buckets they've already half emptied, just for the rhythm of it. "Still need something to do," one of them says when you glance her way. You get it. And this is where the whispers begin, not of panic or blame, but of relief, or more accurately, confusion wrapped in hope. "Do you smell it?" someone asks. "It's cooler." Another adds, "The flames skipped this row, just leapt over it." A third shrugs, maybe they got bored. You round the bend and find the reason: a vast stone courtyard bordered by thick masonry buildings. It's not untouched, but it's scorched, not consumed. You run a hand along the wall. Cool. Solid. Unlike everything else you've touched today. And then you hear a different kind of conversation. Quiet, reverent, slightly scandalized. Maybe it's a blessing, or a sign, or a cleansing. A cleansing. Ah! And there it is, the age-old tendency to find meaning in disaster. Because when your city's just spent days becoming a charcoal sketch of itself, you start reaching for narratives that make it feel less random. You sit for a moment on a broken step, listening. People around you aren't weeping anymore. They're murmuring, reflecting, wondering if maybe this fire is doing something good. One man nearby leans on a cane, his face creased with soot and time. "No more plague rats," he mutters. A few people nod. That's right, the plague. London had only just clawed its way out of a brutal wave of bubonic death. Whole parishes had been marked with red crosses, families sealed in their homes, corpses piled so high they collapsed the carts meant to carry them. Fun summer memories. But then the fire came. And as horrifying as it is, people are beginning to whisper that maybe it burned more than buildings. Historians today, they still argue. Some believe the Great Fire really did help end the plague by scorching infected areas and disrupting the rat and flea population that carried the disease. Others think the plague had already begun to fade by the time the fire started. Truth is, it's probably a bit of both. Fire has a way of interrupting patterns, both physical and psychological. But to the people here, it feels like redemption. A fiery reset button pressed by the universe. You watch a midwife tie a rag around her head and declare, "Maybe this is the new beginning." A chimney sweep with a bandaged hand responds, "A fiery bath for a filthy city." You want to point out the irony, but you let it slide. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Some Londoners actually believed the fire was purging the city of sin, that it was divine intervention, not punishment this time, but mercy. A heavenly house cleaning. You picture an angel with a giant mop and a "let's try this again" look on their face. You stand and begin moving again, past a chapel missing its steeple, but still somehow radiating peace. Inside, a priest is sweeping ashes into a neat pile. No sermon, just action. As you walk, the city begins to feel quieter. Not in a defeated way, but in the way someone calms after a fever breaks. Less rage, more ache. Like London itself is lying on a cot, somewhere sweaty but alive. You turn into a street where the homes are mostly gone, but the doorframes still stand, hundreds of them, like silent sentinels. People walk between them with a kind of hushed reverence, as if passing through memories. No shouting here, just low voices. Some even sit inside the outlines of their former homes, like they're remembering how the light used to fall through the window at noon. You sit in one, too. The air feels different. Soot still floats in lazy spirals, but the horizon ahead isn't all orange and black anymore. There's blue in the sky again. Just a sliver. Someone nearby says, "The rats are gone." Another replies, "The stench, too," and someone not loudly says, "Maybe this fire saved us." You don't speak, you just watch the smoke rise in soft, lazy curls. Not angry now, not hungry, just done. And for the first time since this began, you think maybe London isn't being punished. Maybe it's being prepared. You walk on your steps lighter now, not because your legs are any less tired, but because the air has shifted from punishing to bearable, from furnace to, well, something slightly warmer than a public bath, but not actively trying to roast your eyebrows anymore. And it's here, as you pass through the quieter ruins of what used to be a bustling artisans' district, that you start hearing different kinds of sounds. Not wailing, not collapsing, but something closer to conversation. Planning, even sketching. You pause at a wide stone plaza where people have begun gathering around a series of carts and tables, but there are no loaves of bread, no buckets of water. Instead, there are scrolls, parchments, pieces of charcoal. Someone's even found a quill, which is very optimistic considering ink is now probably classified as endangered. At the center of it all, a tall, slightly disheveled man is hunched over a large piece of parchment, muttering things like "no," "wider boulevards," "fire can't skip that," and "domes maybe." Something Greco-Roman but with flair. He waves his hands dramatically and almost knocks over a child carrying a compass. You have just stumbled into a pop-up design studio powered by exhaustion and hope. The man, of course, is Christopher Wren, and he is sketching the bones of a city not yet born. Someone nearby whispers, "He wants to rebuild everything." Another replies, "With domes, big ones." A third shrugs and says, "Honestly, anything not made of old wood and pessimism sounds good right now." And this is where things begin to shift from survival to vision. The fire has cleared space, not just physically, but ideologically. The medieval street patterns, the chaotic clustering, the nightmare alleyways, they're gone. And in their place, a terrifying, exhilarating thing has appeared possibility. You peer over Wren's shoulder politely, of course, and catch a glimpse of his blueprint. Wide streets, organized blocks, a riverfront promenade. There's even a drawing of a new St. Paul's Cathedral, complete with an enormous dome that looks like it could house its own weather system. Wren mutters, "We build upwards. Graceful, enduring, fire-resistant." Then he stares at his quill, like it just insulted him, and says, "Not that you helped much, traitorous nib." He's not the only one dreaming. Another man is mapping out new sewer lines with the kind of intensity usually reserved for romantic poetry. A woman is sketching window frames that are less drafty, more optimistic. Someone else is diagramming a public square where no one is allowed to sell fish or yell about cheese. It's hopeful. It's slightly unhinged. It's exactly what London needs. You walk among the dreamers, careful not to smudge anyone's work, and listen. A new city. Cleaner. Wider. Safer. The words swirl in the air like incantations. You feel like you've walked into the aftermath of a fairy tale where the dragon's finally gone, and the villagers are wondering if they should start putting in skylights. And here's your mainstream historical gem. Wren really did propose a completely redesigned London symmetrical streets, grand public buildings, open plazas. He wasn't the only one either. Others submitted grand plans full of Baroque ambition. But very little of those grand ideas were realized, because spoiler alert money, also property rights. Turns out people don't like giving up their scorched land even when it's literally still smoking. Historians argue to this day whether Wren's ideal London was ever truly possible or just a fever dream drawn in the wake of trauma. But one part did come to life, his new St. Paul's Cathedral. A dome that would rise not from the ashes, but from conviction. It became a symbol not just of survival, but of ambition stubborn enough to challenge fire itself. And now for your quirky moment, someone brings a roasted apple to Wren, and he eats it without realizing it's charred on one side. He chews thoughtfully and says, could be a trend. You smile and continue on walking past sketches pinned to scorched walls with bits of broken glass, each one more ambitious than the last green Spaces Schools theaters made of stone. One child has drawn a flying machine above a new London skyline. You don't have the heart to tell him he's about 200 years early. You sit near a group discussing street lighting. Lamps, one says, gas-powered, or candle-lined. Too flammable, another counters. What if we invent non-fire-based light? Everyone laughs like they're drunk on ash and optimism. You laugh too. Because this moment is something sacred. It's after. The first clear vision of what comes next. You pick up a piece of charcoal and draw a simple line across the ground. A street, a river, doesn't matter. It's forward. And as the embers of yesterday cool into outlines of tomorrow, you realize the most radical thing happening here isn't architecture. It's hope. You stretch your back and dust the ash from your knees, though it clings like a needy X. Around you, the architects and daydreamers keep sketching with the kind of energy usually reserved for desperate poets and people redecorating apartments at 3 a.m. But you've got one name on your mind now, Wren. Christopher Wren. So you follow the thread. Past broken columns and soot-kissed bricks, you come across a makeshift tent, really more of a glorified curtain over a fence, and find the man himself again seated on an overturned barrel, sketching a dome with the fierce intensity of someone trying to convince a deity to co-sign his vision. He sees you and waves vaguely. Sit if you must, but please don't lean on the table. It's more concept than furniture. You sit. In front of him is a fresh parchment. It shows a massive cathedral rising in defiance of gravity and good sense. A central dome flanked by towers with rays of imagined sunlight beaming off the spire like something out of a holy fever dream. You tilt your head. He notices and sighs, "Yes, yes, I know." "Too round," they'll say. "Too bold." But what's the point of rebuilding a city if we don't give it a proper hat? You like him immediately. Here's your mainstream moment. Christopher Wren did in fact become the architect behind the new St. Paul's Cathedral, one of the most iconic structures in London's skyline today. It took decades to build despite objections, budget issues, and that one time a bishop thought the dome might be too Italian, which, to be fair, is an odd thing to be mad about in architecture. Wren, undeterred, carried on. He redesigned the cathedral from the inside out, incorporating engineering tricks that were borderline wizardry for the 17th century. His dome, a triple-layered masterpiece. One inner dome for beauty, one structural middle for stability, and one outer dome to make everyone say, "Ooh!" He leans toward you, now ink smudged on his fingers, and says, "This isn't just about a building. It's about declaring something. We burned. Yes. But we're going to rise, domed and fabulous." You glance around the tent. There are models made of wax bits of chalk sketches on crates, a cup of something that smells vaguely like tea and desperation, and a rough timeline on the wall that just says beside the word completion. A young assistant scampers in and announces that someone from the guild wants Wren to make the dome smaller. He groans and mutters, "Let them build a smaller dome on their church then." You pretend not to hear. Outside London is beginning to move differently. Still scarred, still coughing, but coherent. You see organized teams now, workers with carts, clearing debris, priests arranging temporary shelter spaces, and children being scolded for drawing mustaches on surviving statues. Order is creeping back in like moss on stone. You walk past a group of stonecutters shaping new columns. They argue over which material resists fire best. One insists on Portland stone. Another insists on just not wood, for heaven's sake. You leave them to it. Nearby, a man with soot-blonde hair is passionately arguing that the new buildings should include drainage systems. Radical. Revolutionary. Slightly damp, but in a good way. And here's your quirky fact. Wren's vision for London included more than churches. He wanted better streets, fireproof materials, and believe it or not, an observatory. Because nothing says we survived a fire like measuring the stars from a still smoldering city. Historians still debate whether his urban plans were too ambitious or if the city simply lacked the political will to follow through. Most of his sweeping grid ideas were scrapped in favor of rebuilding on existing plots. Because, of course, even in ashes, property lines are sacred. You cross a square where a few painters are already at work, capturing the noble ruins, while there are still noble ruins to capture. One artist is painting a woman feeding pigeons in front of a half-melted fountain. Another is sketching Wren himself dome in hand with what can only be described as artistic optimism. You climb a small hill made of rubble and look out across the city. It's still wounded, still smoldering, but not lost. And then you spot something that stops you, a wooden scaffold rising in the distance, the beginnings of construction. You can't tell if it's a chapel, a market, or a modest home, but it doesn't matter. It's new, it's vertical. It's proof that someone believes there's a future to be had here. You look skyward. Smoke still curls lazily in some corners. But higher than that blue. Clear. Like the fire took the filth and left behind honesty. Like the air has decided to start over too. You descend the rubble hill slowly, a bit achy, a bit dazed. London is still being written line by line, dome by dome, and you realize something profound. This isn't just a rebuild. It's a reimagining. The path ahead isn't paved yet, just loose stones and footprints pressed into soot, but it stretches confidently through what used to be tangled alleyways. Someone's already staked out new street names on bits of scrap wood: Hope Lane, Ash Rise. One just says, "Please rebuild my bakery." Here. You smile. London's got jokes again. You follow the new path toward the heart of the city, toward the spot where the fire had once roared the loudest. Now it's quieter. Not silent, but deliberate. Every sound has intent. Hammering, sawing, the clatter of bricks stacked by hands that still shake a little. You pass a small group of schoolboys racing each other with sticks, shrieking with glee as they hop over a smoldering gap like it's a dragon's pit. One of them waves at you and shouts, "My uncle says we're going to have a clean city now." Another yells, "My da says no more rats." The third just falls in a pile of ash and laughs until he chokes. You help him up. He dusts himself off and asks if London will ever be pretty again. You tell him she will, even if it takes a while, because that's the truth. No one really says out loud, rebuilding isn't just about stone and scaffolding. It's about belief. And right now, this city is buzzing with it. You turn onto a main thoroughfare where a temporary speaker's stand has been erected, little more than a barrel and a broken chair, but it does the job. A man with a parchment in hand is shouting out new building codes, No more thatch brick only. If you've got timber, trade it for literally anything else. The crowd applauds. Another shouts back, "What about chimneys? Only if cleaned monthly, huh?" That's not going to happen. They all laugh because even in post-apocalyptic soot, some things never change. And here's your fact for the hour after the fire. London's government did pass new regulations for fireproof construction. Houses had to be built from brick or stone. Streets were to be widened, sort of. The city banned projecting upper stories that leaned out like friendly elbows. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And yet not all lessons stuck. Historians still argue whether enough truly changed after the fire, or whether London eventually slid back into comfortable old habits. Some say the city reformed. Others say it simply learned to live with danger more politely. You pause at a ruined churchyard where masons are already measuring the foundation. A plaque on the wall reads, "Here stood the Church of St. Mildred, devoured by flame, remembered in stone." You run your fingers across the name. There's something honest about it, not dramatic, just factual. Fire came. Fire took. We're still here. You sit on the edge of a broken wall and take in the surroundings. Bits of scaffolding peek above rooftops. A makeshift bakery serves warm bread out of a cart. Yes, it's slightly overdone too soon. The sound of a flute dances down the street, cheerful and a little off-key. A couple argues over window shutters. It's life. There's also something else. A man is carefully painting a large sign on a wooden board, the monument. He tells you it'll mark the fire's starting point. "So we don't forget," he says. "So we don't pretend it didn't happen." He taps the brush to his lip and adds, "Maybe we climb it. Maybe we look down and remember what rose up again." You nod. It's poetic. He shrugs. Or maybe tourists just like tall things. Fun fact. The monument really does get built, designed by guess who, Wren, and it still stands centuries later, a testament not to the destruction but to the rebuilding. You walk again. Past rows of people laying brick with the intensity of monks copying sacred texts. Past children playing in the dust. Past street performers doing terrible juggling acts for a crowd of tired but grateful workers. Past widows cleaning soot off stone angels. Past a man offering fireproof hats made of copper. They do not work, by the way. And you start to realize something. This fire didn't just change London's skyline. It burned away her illusions, the illusion of permanence, the illusion of untouchability, the idea that a city could go unchanged forever simply because it was old. And what rose in its place wasn't just architecture, it was intention. From now on, every brick laid is a choice. Every beam reinforced, every window spaced with care, every escape path measured and planned. From now on, London is a city that remembers. You step over one last pile of rubble and find yourself at the edge of what used to be the Central Market. It's flattened now, just a wide field of smoothed dirt and ash. But someone staked a small wooden sign in the center. It reads, "Here something better begins." And somehow you believe it. You wander slowly now, not because you're tired, though you are, but because London herself is moving slower. The frantic fleeing has faded. The scrambling, the shouting, the wild flinging of buckets, it's all quieted into something else, something closer to ritual. In the distance you hear a hammer strike. Once, twice, a beat, a beginning. It echoes through the streets, bouncing off the freshly cleared walls like a hymn sung by hands instead of mouths. And that's when you realize the fire has left, but its ghost remains. Not the scary kind, the reflective kind. The kind that sits beside you on a scorched stoop and doesn't say a word because it knows there's nothing left to add. Just ash and air, and the slow, cautious rhythm of life returning. You take one final route through the city, this time toward the edge, the place where the fire finally stopped. not because of human brilliance or clever engineering, just the wind. It shifted, a simple change of direction, and the flames lost their path. Historians still debate the moment whether the fire breaks had any effect, whether divine grace stepped in, or whether London simply got lucky. You reach a ridge overlooking the rooftops, some new, some half rebuilt, some still blackened silhouettes against a paler sky. A few chimney pots remain strangely untouched, like they were too stubborn to burn. You sit on a crate that was once part of someone's storefront and let your gaze drift. Below you the city breathes again. Not steadily, not easily, but with the wheezy determination of someone getting back up after the worst kind of fall. You see children drawing in the dirt with sticks, a woman sweeping soot from her doorstep like it's an insult, a man fixing a window that has no wall yet. He hums, and as you look back over the path you've taken, the bakery, the riverside, the empty cellars, the broken towers, the makeshift drawings of a future that doesn't yet exist, you feel something both old and new settle in your chest. You were here, you saw it, you walked with London through the fire and into the long, slow after. You rise, stretch, and begin the walk back through the city not because you must, but because you can. Past the faint smell of char, past the foundations outlined in chalk, past the scaffolded bones of buildings still waiting for roofs. You pass a man selling tea from a cart with a sign that reads, "Survived fire. Survives Mondays." You buy a cup. It tastes like burnt cinnamon and defiance. You nod. He nods back. Further down the street, a church bell rings. Not because there's an emergency, just because it's noon, and for a brief, fleeting moment the sound doesn't echo off ruins. It rings into potential. This city will rise, not all at once, not the way Wren wanted, but it will. Dome by dome, brick by brick, in stubborn silence and cautious song. And you'll remember the glow on your face, the taste of soot, the sound of pigeons winging through ash, the sight of St. Paul's dome still just a sketch dreaming of the skyline. The fire took much, but it left something behind, too, a lesson etched into stone and smoke. Nothing endures like a city that refuses to vanish. So now as you settle into your pillow, let that city begin to fade. Let the hammering and sawing drift into the distance, their rhythm softened into the background hum of a dream. Imagine the rooftops curling in gentle plumes of chimney smoke, not flame. Streets swept clean, children laughing, the smell of bread returning, not scorched but warm and fresh and safe. The Thames flowing quietly, no longer carrying firewood and forgotten shoes, but only the steady hush of water doing what water does best, moving forward. Picture the spire of St. Paul's completed at last, its dome gleaming in the early light, the sun kissing it gently, the bells inside waiting for their next chance to sing, not in warning, but in celebration. Let the city dim in your mind now. Let the stones cool. Let the sky return to blue. The embers have burned out. The ash has settled. You are far from the fire now, far from the shouts and the rubble and the rush. You are somewhere quiet, wrapped in the softness of memory and the promise of tomorrow. Breathe in slowly. Feel the air cool and gentle on your face. Breathe out. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the faintest echo of a hammer. Not frantic, just calm, steady, building, always building.